Theodore W. a veteran of the 7th Cavalry, took an untold story with him to his grave. As one of the last surviving witnesses to General Custer's final moments, his first-hand account remains a priceless piece of history. In 1904, he wrote down his memories in a private letter, and today we reveal that testimony to the world. But before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel to support and grow our community. I received your letters dated July 28th and August 2nd, in which you requested details of my personal experiences and observations from General Custer's last battle. Time has undoubtedly blurred certain memories, and the limited hours I can devote to this letter mean that my account may lack structure. I've followed your published articles on the subject with great interest and was pleased to learn they'll soon be compiled into a book. In response to your inquiry, I can affirm that I had the privilege of serving under General Custer from my enlistment in 1873 until his untimely death. I joined him in every campaign, except for the year 1875, when my company was stationed in the South. In the spring of 1876, word reached us of an impending campaign against the Sioux, involving 3 major Army columns. Soon afterward, our unit received marching orders and moved from Shreveport, Louisiana, to Fort Lincoln in the Dakota Territory. At that time, General Custer was in Washington, testifying before a congressional committee, and only returned to join us a few days before our departure. While en route from Washington, I was briefly detained under arrest in Chicago, so I'll omit the details of our journey from Fort Lincoln. Once back in command, General Custer's trademark energy and determination were evident as he quickly arranged the troops for the march toward the Rosebud, where General Terry had already advanced aboard a supply steamer to meet with General Gibbon's forces further west. Believing them to be close by, we continued through the night until reaching the Yellowstone River, where we set up camp, hoping to intercept the steamer if it happened to be downstream. At daybreak, the march resumed, and we soon spotted General Gibbon's supply train following the river, accompanied by the steamer far west. Messengers were sent to report Major Reno's discovery of a large Indian trail. Before long, we established camp near the mouth of the Rosebud, where a council of war was held to study Reno's findings in detail. The following day, plans were finalized for an offensive movement. On the evening of the 21st, as I recall, a final meeting took place aboard the steamer, where General Custer received his formal instructions, much as you've previously described. During that meeting, General Gibbon was asked when he expected to arrive at the mouth of the Little Bighorn, and he replied that it would not be before noon on the 26th. It was also during this discussion that mention arose of Custer being offered the 2nd Cavalry Battalion and a detachment of artillery, both aboard the steamer. He declined, expressing confidence in the abilities of his own regiment and concern that the artillery would only slow their advance in hostile territory. Many of us speculated that this decision was motivated by his desire to maintain full independent command, a privilege he had enjoyed in earlier campaigns. In any case, his choice was respected. On the afternoon of June 22nd, our regiment gathered before Generals Terry and Gibbon, then immediately set out along the trail Major Reno had discovered. From that point forward, we followed the path without deviation, except when forced to seek better camping grounds. Despite clear orders, no scouting of the surrounding area was carried out, nor were any dispatches sent to General Gibbon, even though George Herendeen, a capable scout attached to our command, was available for such duties. Our pace remained steady and determined until the evening of the 24th, when we suddenly left the main trail and appeared to settle for the night. This was, in fact, a deliberate deception intended to mislead any Indian observers, as we were instructed to remain saddled and ready for a night march. From the moment we departed the Rosebud, General Custer's demeanor noticeably changed. His familiar, restless energy returned. He was entirely consumed by the drive to find and engage the enemy. It's worth noting that the trail we pursued veered away from the direction of the Missouri River, and according to reports from Bloody Knife and our Crow Scouts, led toward a force estimated at 1,000 to 1,200 Indians, later confirmed to have come from the Missouri River settlements. Nearly all of them were fighting men. Around 11 o'clock that night, orders were issued to ready the horses and form ranks. At the same time, a reconnaissance group composed of Crow and Ree Scouts, along with several officers, including Lieutenants Varnum and Hare, advanced ahead to scout the pass over the divide and attempt to locate the enemy's position. Leaving our temporary resting place, we resumed following the trail, intending to cross the ridge and reach the cover of the Little Bighorn foothills before dawn. However, the rough terrain and difficulty keeping the trail in view slowed our progress, leaving us by sunrise in a deep ravine beneath steep cliffs, uncertain of our distance from the river. During the night, it was reported that General Custer had gone ahead to join the scouts. At first light, they claimed to have sighted the Indian village in the Little Bighorn Valley, a report the general reportedly met with skepticism. Not long after, signs appeared that our presence had been discovered. A dropped ammunition box had been recovered by a detachment who found Indians inspecting it. This seemed to convince Custer that swift action was necessary. As the companies were divided into separate commands, Mitch Bowyer, our half-Crow interpreter, cautioned the general that the valley contained more warriors than our regiment could handle. Custer rebuked him, questioning his courage, to which Bowyer replied that he would follow him anywhere, but warned that entering that valley would be certain death for them all. Shortly before the advance, Lieutenant McIntosh instructed me to report to General Custer's staff as an orderly, a duty I assumed without delay. The general then ordered me to remain with Lieutenant Cook, the regimental adjutant, and carry out whatever tasks he assigned. During this brief pause, many of the men, worn out from the long march, lay on the ground asleep while their horses grazed on sparse sagebrush. Soon after, Custer gave the command to move forward, stating that whichever company in each battalion was first ready would take position on the right flank. Within moments, all were mounted and aligned for action. At this same time, Benteen's battalion was sent off to the left to scout the terrain, flush out any nearby hostiles, and report any major discoveries. Reno's battalion continued along the main trail, while General Custer led 5 companies to the right. Captain McDougall followed in the rear with the pack train, advancing as conditions permitted. With these orders given, the column moved out promptly. After about half an hour of hard riding, the rough terrain forced Custer's column to veer left, where we eventually rejoined Major Reno's detachment, moving along the trail as quickly as the steep ascent would allow. Once we completed the grueling climb, we emerged onto a ridgeline overlooking a broad, rolling plain that sloped gently toward the river several miles away. From that elevated position, we could see Reno's men advancing briskly along the trail in the distance, while far to the left, Benteen's battalion could be seen scouting the ridges as ordered. We advanced parallel to Reno's movement, but maintained our position on his right flank. Those of us close to General Custer noticed a growing tension in his manner. He would frequently gallop ahead of the column, halt to look back, and then charge forward again with renewed urgency. At that crucial point, we saw a vast cloud of dust rising from the river valley, though its cause was uncertain. Custer, accompanied only by his bugler, rode toward the river and halted atop a high bluff. From there, we observed him wave his hat, seemingly signaling to distant figures. When he returned to the front line, commanded by the seasoned Captain Keogh and the men of I Troop, Custer's excitement was evident. He exclaimed with great enthusiasm, "The hostiles are on the run. If we press them hard enough, I'd give half our horses to overtake them." Keogh, calm and steady, surveyed the eager faces of his men and replied, "General, we'll give all these men and mounts can offer." Moments later, the bugle sounded the first charge since we left the Rosebud, and we thundered north along the river, making several failed attempts to descend into the valley. After perhaps the third unsuccessful approach, Custer conferred urgently with Lieutenant Cook, who quickly scribbled a message on his notepad. "Take this to Major Reno," Cook ordered as he handed me the folded paper. "Stay with his command until we rejoin them, then report back immediately." Before I could respond, the rest of the column galloped past and disappeared into the maze of ravines. For a brief moment, I watched them vanish, realizing I was alone and deep in hostile territory. I spurred my horse and rode hard in the direction of Reno's men, following the trail of dust that marked their advance. By good fortune, I encountered little resistance, just a few distant gunshots that spurred me to ride faster. After roughly 6 miles of hard riding, I reached Reno's position just as his men were dismounting to form a skirmish line. I handed him the dispatch, unaware of its contents. He glanced over it briefly, then tucked it into his pocket. At that same moment, our scouts suddenly broke into panic and fled all the way back toward the Powder River and the safety of the supply train. The situation deteriorated rapidly as Indian warriors began surrounding our position. We were forced to wheel around and fight while falling back toward the timberline, losing several horses to enemy fire and others to sheer panic. Eventually, we reached the relative safety of the woods where the trees and riverbank offered better protection. From there, we managed to regroup and establish a more organized defense, at least temporarily. Soon afterward, we noticed Captain Moylan preparing his company for movement. Nearby, Lieutenant Wallace called out to Captain French, who commanded the center line, asking for orders. French replied that he hadn't received any, but would try to find out. Moments later, he shouted that it appeared we were to mount up for a charge, though no official order had been given. He advised us to saddle up and be ready to move. As we did so, it became clear that about 15 troopers had lost their horses. Some shot, others bolting in fright. Lieutenant McIntosh, whose horse had been killed, took a mount from Private McCormick, who grimly remarked that it made little difference. They were doomed either way, and dying on foot was as good as dying in the saddle. When we rode out from the cover of the trees, we were stunned to discover that instead of charging the enemy, Reno was leading a full withdrawal toward the bluffs across the river. The Sioux quickly recognized the movement and concentrated their fire on our flanks. Despite the confusion, casualties were fewer than expected, as most of the enemy fire went wide. The retreat, however, soon devolved into chaos, more a rout than an organized pullback. Contrary to later rumors that Reno fired his revolver wildly before throwing it away, I can attest that this never happened. The revolver in question remained with General Benteen or his family for many years afterward. During the frantic withdrawal, I rode on the left flank near the timber when my horse was suddenly struck and went down, hurling me into a patch of sagebrush. By sheer luck, I escaped with only minor injuries, though my uniform was left in tatters. As I scrambled to my feet, Lieutenant Wallace rode past at full speed, shouting for me to get back to the trees and confirming what I already suspected. My horse had been shot. Without stopping to check, I sprinted for cover and managed to reach the timber after only a brief hesitation. From that sheltered spot, I watched our men forcing their mounts through the perilous river crossing. Lieutenant Hodgson's horse plunged into the current as he, clearly wounded, struggled to stay upright in the saddle. Freeing himself from the stirrups, he grasped another trooper's saddle strap for support as they pushed across. Once on the opposite bank, his injury became obvious, yet he pressed on with remarkable resolve. The soldier who had helped him tried to pull him up, but couldn't rein in his own mount. Suddenly, Hodgson appeared to take another hit. His grip loosened and he crumpled to the ground. Summoning his remaining strength, he staggered to his feet and reached toward another comrade who had stopped to assist. At this point, the trees and riverbank provided temporary protection, allowing us to regroup and mount a more coordinated defense, though only for a short time. Soon after, we noticed Captain Moylan preparing his company to move out. Nearby, Lieutenant Wallace called out to Captain French, who commanded the central position, asking what our next orders were. French replied that he hadn't received any official instructions, but would try to clarify the situation. A short while later, he shouted back that it seemed we were to mount for a charge, though no formal order had come down. He advised us to saddle up and get ready to join the action. As we did, it became clear that around 15 men had lost their horses. Some shot, others driven off in panic. Lieutenant McIntosh, now without a mount, seized a horse from Private McCormick, who remarked grimly that it made little difference. Their fate was sealed either way, and dying on foot was as good as dying in the saddle. When we rode out from the trees, we were stunned to find that instead of attacking the enemy, Major Reno was leading a withdrawal toward the bluffs across the river. This movement immediately drew concentrated fire from the warriors along our flanks. Fortunately, their aim was poor, and casualties were lighter than expected, though the retreat quickly turned chaotic, more of a rout than an orderly fallback. Despite later stories claiming that Reno fired his revolver wildly before discarding it, I can state with certainty that such reports were false. The revolver remained in the possession of General Benteen, or his family for many years afterward. During the confusion, I rode along the left flank near the tree line when my horse suddenly went down beneath me, hurling me into a clump of sagebrush. By some miracle, I escaped with only minor injuries. My uniform suffered worse than I did. As I got back to my feet, Lieutenant Wallace galloped by once again, shouting for me to get to the trees and confirming that my horse had indeed been killed. Without pausing to confirm, I dashed for cover and reached the timber after only a brief hesitation. From my concealed position, I watched as our troopers urged their mounts through the perilous river crossing. Lieutenant Hodgson's horse plunged into the current, its rider clearly wounded and struggling to stay in the saddle. Freeing himself from the stirrups, Hodgson grabbed another soldier's saddle strap to steady himself and make it across. Once on the opposite bank, his wounds were obvious, yet he pressed forward with remarkable resolve. The trooper who had assisted him tried to pull him up but couldn't stop his own horse. Suddenly, Hodgson appeared to take another hit. His grip slipped and he crumpled to the ground. For a moment, he rose unsteadily, reaching toward another comrade who had turned back to help. Then, with grim determination, Hodgson faced his pursuers, drew his revolver, and fired defiantly. Almost at once, a volley of shots rang out from across the river, where I stood watching helplessly. I saw him stagger and fall, his fate now sealed. As the last of our men disappeared into the distant ravines, I realized I was alone, acutely aware of my peril. By some stroke of luck, the warriors seemed unaware of my presence, consumed instead with looting and mutilating the fallen along the riverbank. Moments later, the sharp, rolling crack of gunfire echoed from downstream, unmistakable evidence that Custer's column had engaged the enemy. The few glimpses I'd had of the immense village filled me with dread. His men must have been facing the same overwhelming numbers we had encountered. Suddenly, most of the warriors broke away from the riverbank and rushed toward the direction of the new fighting. Spotting Scout George Herendeen nearby, I motioned for him to join me. When he reached me, he reported that about 15 of our stranded troopers had regrouped some 200 yards deeper within the timber. Their attempts to reach the river had been beaten back by deadly accurate gunfire. Before leaving, the enemy had set the riverside brush ablaze, perhaps to conceal their withdrawal or to drive out any survivors. Ironically, the thick smoke turned out to be our salvation, shielding us as we made a desperate crossing. Wading carefully through the swift current, we eventually encountered one of our Crow Scouts, who led us to the remnants of our command. There we found that Benteen's battalion had arrived and joined forces with Reno's battered survivors. But still, no word had come from Custer. As we shared our accounts of the fighting, movement caught our attention, a strip of white cloth waving from the direction of our former position. Lieutenant Hare bravely stepped into the open to signal from the bluffs, establishing contact with the stranded men, who then braved the river to rejoin us. They turned out to be the dismounted troopers left behind in the confusion of the retreat. My last memory of Lieutenant McIntosh was seeing him riding McCormick's horse several lengths ahead, his loose lariat dragging behind him. The trailing picket pins sparked against the rocks and brush as nearby troopers shouted warnings he didn't seem to hear. When his mount suddenly went down, I couldn't tell whether he'd been struck. As I passed, I caught a glimpse of his still form. He appeared unconscious, or worse. The following morning, after the enemy had withdrawn, we found Lieutenant McIntosh's body exactly where he had fallen, confirming his tragic death. While observing the valley from the bluffs, I overheard a heated argument nearby. Captain Weir shouted angrily, "If you won't move forward, I'll go alone. And when we get out of this, there'll be consequences." With that, he rode off in fury. Moments later, I saw his men mounting up and advancing toward the sound of distant gunfire. Though no official orders were given, the rest of the command began to follow, except for the steady formations of Benteen's and Godfrey's troops, who maintained proper discipline. Our advance continued until we encountered Weir's force falling back, overwhelmed by superior numbers. We immediately formed a defensive line, covering their retreat as they passed through our ranks, then withdrew in good order behind them. With the support of this rear guard, we managed an organized fighting withdrawal. During this movement, Colonel Benteen, who had effectively assumed command of our section, turned to Lieutenant Wallace and said, "Wallace, we can't keep falling back. Hold your right flank here and prepare to stand." Wallace replied grimly, "Sir, I've no troop left, just 2 men." Benteen gave a dry, humorless laugh. "Then form up with those 2. I'll update you when I know more about our situation." That small remnant became the core of our defensive position. Others gradually joined us as we took cover behind sagebrush, hastily building makeshift breastworks and returning fire whenever possible. We held this position under relentless attack until darkness finally brought a measure of relief. During the night, we strengthened our defenses, corralling the remaining horses, setting up a crude field hospital, and digging shallow trenches wherever the ground allowed. At dawn, the fighting began again with the same ferocity, lasting until about 3 in the afternoon, when the warriors abruptly began dismantling their lodges and moving upriver, just beyond the reach of our guns. Twice that afternoon, brave volunteers ventured down to fetch water, each time drawing heavy fire. On the second attempt, Trooper Madden of K Company was struck in the leg, suffering a severe wound that required amputation. He was carried to the surgeons who performed the operation that night. The following day, General Terry and Colonel Gibbons' columns arrived, bringing much-needed reinforcements and grim confirmation of Custer's fate. On June 28th, after transferring our wounded across the river, we returned to bury the dead. With few exceptions, most notably General Custer himself, nearly all of the bodies bore unmistakable signs of mutilation after death. In numerous discussions I held with fellow officers and frontier veterans in the aftermath, 3 principal errors were consistently identified as having led to this catastrophe. The first, and likely the most damaging, was the division of our force into 4 widely separated detachments, spread nearly 15 miles apart from one another, and executed without reliable intelligence about the enemy's strength or movements. This dispersal left each unit dangerously exposed and unsupported. The second was Custer's premature arrival at the battlefield, almost a full day ahead of the intended schedule, which fatally disrupted the overall plan of coordination. The third and final failure was the devastating loss of our cavalry horses and reserve ammunition, which crippled our fighting capability at the most critical juncture of the battle. As these strategic missteps have already been thoroughly analyzed by more qualified military authorities, I will not attempt to expand further on them here. From my own perspective, General Custer was a man of extraordinary courage, though his boldness often verged on recklessness. He had a well-known tendency to plunge into danger without fully weighing the odds against him. I have long believed that some of his fatal decisions at the Little Bighorn were influenced by the deep personal humiliation he suffered following his public rebuke by the president. It seems possible he sought to reclaim his honor and reputation through a dramatic victory reminiscent of his earlier triumph at the Washita, a success that might have restored his image as the nation's foremost Indian fighter and military hero. Whatever his motivations, it must be acknowledged that he faced his end with courage and dignity, dying in the company of the loyal soldiers who had followed him through many campaigns and victories before. Respectfully submitted. Theo W. Golden. I trust that this eyewitness account offers meaningful insight into the events at the Little Bighorn in the broader Sioux campaign of 1876.